Okay, and we are recording. And I'm lucky enough to have with me today Dr. Peter Brukner, who is a sports medic, author, and real food advocate. He's recently been the doctor to the Australian cricket team and Liverpool Football Club. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much for coming on. Maybe you can start by just saying what your background is and how did it lead you to where you are now?
Right. Well, it's a long story, but I'll keep it short. My background is in medicine, so I'm a doctor, and I've been involved in sports medicine for the last 35 odd years, with a clinic here in Melbourne, Australia, and working with a whole bunch of sporting teams over the years, from professional Australian football teams here to our national teams in swimming, hockey, athletics, a couple of Olympics, Atlanta Olympics, Sydney Olympics, lots of Commonwealth Games, World Championships, and so on. Then moved into football, did our national team, the Socceroos, through to the World Cup in 2010. And then went straight from there to Liverpool, where I spent a couple of years as the head of sports medicine, sports science. And after that, 5 years with the Aussie cricket team as their team doctor. So finished up there nearly 3 years ago now, before their little indiscretions in South Africa. So I'm not taking any responsibility for that. Clearly they were missing my moral guidance, but that's okay. No, I had a great did 51 tests in a row there, and that was terrific. But around about that time, I sort of changed tack in my career a little bit, or in my interests, really. I'd had some sort of personal health issues, while, I seemed to be reasonably healthy. In reality, I wasn't that healthy, and I had a strong family history of diabetes. I was pre-diabetic. I was overweight, borderline obese. I had a fatty liver. I had a whole bunch of things. It didn't really affect me so much day to day, but was significantly sort of significant metabolic illness. And around that time, this is about 2012, I started to hear a few rumours, initially from Tim Noakes, who is an old friend of mine. Tim is probably the world's most eminent sports scientist and someone whose genius I'd always admired over the years. He'd challenged many of the orthodoxies of sports science and inevitably proven to be correct. And he suddenly sort of came out and started saying that we'd got it all wrong as far as nutrition goes, and it was actually it was sugar and carbohydrates that were the problem, not fat. And initially, I thought, Tim's finally lost it. He's gone, he's getting demented in his old age. And but because of who it was and the fact that it was Tim, I thought, no, I need to look into this. And I read a book by Gary Taubes called Good Calories, Bad Calories. I think in the UK it was published as The Diet Delusion. And this book just blew me away. I mean, it was incredible. I couldn't believe it, really. Because not only did it talk about the relative merits of fats and carbohydrates, but it talked about the politics of how the low fat movement had won out over the low sugar movement back in the 60s and 70s. And I'd always assumed, like we all had probably, that it was on the basis of good solid science, and that the whole of the Western world had been on this low-fat diet for 30 or 40 years for good reason. And this book suggested that there was very little reason. And it was more on the basis of money and politics rather than science. And I remember putting the book down each night saying, no, this couldn't be right. We couldn't have got this wrong for all this time. I mean, I found it really disturbing, really, really challenging. So I then sort of dived into every book and article and research paper that I possibly could, basically hoping to disprove what Noakes and Taubes said. But the more I read, the more I thought, they're actually onto something. And it's really, again, I found it very challenging. So as a scientist, I thought, well, it's time to do some research. But also as a scientist, I knew that research with an n=1 is a waste of time, except of course when the one is you. So I decided it was time to do an n=1 experiment on myself, trying what we call a low carb, healthy fat diet. So I got all my bloods done on day one, and I embarked on this diet. And I basically stopped eating sugar, processed carbohydrates, bread, rice, pasta, potatoes, fruit juice. Um, I stopped eating margarine. I went back to eating butter, and stopped using all vegetable oils other than olive oil. And the only fruit I ate was berries. So you're probably thinking, well, that doesn't leave much to eat. But I went back to eating probably the way that my parents and grandparents had eaten, eating really real food. So I went back to eating meat and fish, dairy and eggs. Eggs have been demonized for years, too much cholesterol. So I went back to eggs. I went back to butter instead of margarine. And as I said, the only fruits I ate were berries. I ate lots of nuts and cheese and olive oil, and drank mainly water. I had a couple of little indulgences. I'd have the odd glass of red wine, the odd square of dark chocolate. But I figured if I was going to be indulgent, I might as well do things that have a bit of health value as well. So I started this. I decided I'd do it for 3 months, 13 weeks. And so what happened? Well, the first thing that happened was I stopped being hungry. So instead of waking up in the morning, having my my cereal or muesli or whatever for at 8 o'clock, and then getting to about 10:30, thinking, "Oh God, it's lunchtime yet. When's the muffin tray coming around?" I would not be hungry all day, and I'd have bacon and eggs and avocado or whatever for breakfast, and I wouldn't be hungry all day. I might have a handful of nuts if I got a bit peckish, and then I'd eat dinner, and so I went from eating 3 meals and 3 snacks a day to probably eating 2 meals a day. So that was the first thing I noticed. Then I started to lose weight. Every week I'd weigh myself. And the first week I thought, just fluid or, beginner's luck or whatever. And the second week and third, every week I just kept losing weight. It was just ridiculous. I was eating really well. I was never hungry. I thought, it's not meant to be this easy, but, and then I started to notice a few other things. I felt I was much more alert. I didn't sort of fall asleep. I feel like falling asleep at my desk in the afternoon. My sleep improved, my quality of sleep. I stopped snoring. Which is very popular. Happy wife, happy life. And my concentration improved. No, excuse me, I didn't stop sneezing. But my concentration improved, my energy improved. I thought my exercise capacity, I'd always, done a bit of exercise, but it just seemed effortless, after a while. So at the end of that 13 weeks, I'd lost 13 kilograms. I repeated my blood test, and all my metabolic abnormalities had resolved. So my fatty liver that I'd had for 10 years, completely resolved. I had every blood test I'd had for 10 years, or 4 of them, I think, had shown significant fatty liver. And every time the blood test would come back, liver function results abnormal, consistent with fatty liver. I didn't really know what a fatty liver was, and I figured I was on a low-fat diet, and like most doctors, I completely ignored it. And my triglycerides came back to normal, my insulin, everything basically normalized. And I went from being borderline overweight, obese into sort of a healthy weight category. So it was a pretty amazing 3 months. I'd lost 13 kilograms, so it resolved all my metabolic issues. I should have mentioned that my father had developed type 2 diabetes at the same age I was at then, and then I'd seen that the ravaging effect that it had on his health over the ensuing years. And I was pretty determined not to go down that track. So that, and I was clearly, in retrospect, pre-diabetic. I had the fatty liver, the high insulin, all that sort of signs of insulin resistance. So, and that completely resolved in this 13-week period. Unbelievable. And as I said, I sort of almost felt guilty. I thought, it's supposed to be really hard, this diet caper. And so then I sort of, my family kept saying I was looking too skinny in the face. So I backed off a little bit, put on a couple of Ks, but basically I've stayed on more or less on that diet, not being quite as strict over the last, what is it now? Nearly 8 years, 7.5 years. And felt pretty good, pretty healthy, lots of energy. And, I think when you go through an experience like that, particularly as a doctor, I mean, you've got 2 choices. You can either just sort of keep it to yourself and just sort of say, oh, well, that's lucky. But I sort of felt almost duty bound, that not that I was the first person to discover this, but, I was one of the people who'd realized this. And I wanted to disseminate that information as much as possible among my colleagues, my peers, the general public as much as I could. So I became, I guess, an advocate for this real food advocate. low carb, healthy fat, and started to give a few talks. And then a few years ago, we started a not-for-profit campaign called Sugar by Half here in Australia, where our aim is to try and reduce the amount of added sugar by half. So, the average Australian is probably having 15, 16 teaspoons of added sugar a day, and the World Health Organization its ideal is no more than 6. So, we certainly need to at least halve that intake of sugar. And we've been very active over the last few years, trying to get that campaign going. And a couple of years ago, the publisher Penguin approached me and said, would I write a book? And my initial response was, well, look, really the last thing the world needs is another bloody diet book. There's hundreds of them out there. But they convinced me that very few of them are by doctors and none by Australian doctors, and that I might have some credibility from my past work and so on. So they convinced me it was a good idea. So I did write a book. It's called A Fat Lot of Good, and it's sold incredibly well. And every day I get a letter from email from someone saying it's changed my life. So it's very rewarding in that regard. So I'm now I still do a little bit of sports medicine, but probably 90% of my time now is spent in basically trying to get people, especially Australians, to eat better, because we just, over the last 30 years, we've just got fatter and sicker. 7 out of 10 Australian males are overweight or obese, half our females, a third of our children. We've got, 2 million Australians with type 2 diabetes, probably another 2 million with pre-diabetes. It's just a massive, lots of other chronic disease that just wasn't around when I was a medical student, and the only thing that's changed is diet. We still exercise roughly the same as we did a generation ago. So that hasn't changed much, but the things that have drastically changed is our diet. And, since we told the world to go low fat, and then the food industry, to its credit, did what we asked them to do, took all the fat out of food. And they soon realised that the problem with that was he took all the flavour out. So they came up with the solution to that, and that was replacing the fat with sugar. So we've really been on a low fat, high sugar diet and dietary guidelines for the last 40 years. And every year we've got fatter and sicker. And yet, we seem to just accept that and not, look back at why that might be happening and what we might be able to do about it. So that was a very long rant. I'm sorry, but that was that's pretty much my story, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I had a kind of Damascene moment myself when I was pointed at the literature and the books and blogs, some of which similar to or the same as what you said, and I changed how I ate, turned my health around completely. And it's interesting the experience of telling people about it, because most people close to me didn't really grasp what I was saying. It was almost like what you were saying. You almost couldn't believe that it could be true that the food environment for the last 50 years has been really bad for us, and the advice given by credible authorities for that time is actually wrong. It just sounds like a crank conspiracy theory almost.
Yeah.
But, like you say, you do an N=1 and realize that you're similar to millions of people who've done the same and turned their health around, not just in a subjective clinical way, but with the kind of important risk markers for cardiovascular disease, which is such a huge killer and comorbid with diabetes. So it's like David Unwin says, if there is a risk to doing this, he'd like someone to point out where it might be.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? I mean, once you've been through it, you find it hard to believe that everyone doesn't get it. And you feel almost, as I said, I feel this sort of almost an obligation really to try and get as many people to realise this as possible. And you mentioned David, and he's done an amazing job at increasing awareness and having an influence on so many people's lives. And we're trying to do something similar in Australia. And it's a battle. When you can't convince your own profession of the importance of this stuff, to start with, it makes it really hard. So I spend a lot of my time talking to general practitioners and to other doctors, and telling them my story, and telling them some of the research and the facts and so on. And yeah, slowly, maybe some of them are coming around, but yeah, gee, it's a slow process, I'm afraid. We're very rigid in our beliefs as doctors. Unfortunately, we're not really open to different ideas, and we tend to believe everything we were told in medical school, for the rest of our lives, and I think it was Tim who said that 50% of everything you learn in medical school turns out to be wrong. You just have to work out which 50%, and we're very, and look, in some ways I don't blame doctors. I mean, because we're not taught any nutrition. I had 0 lectures on nutrition in my medical course. I spent 6 years doing medicine, not a single lecture on nutrition, not a single lecture on exercise. And I don't think things have changed that much. What we're good at is drugs and medications and surgery. That's our comfort zone. So you stay in your comfort zone, and doctors stay in their comfort zone. They feel very threatened when people talk about nutrition and exercise because they don't really understand it. So you stick to what you know. So in a way, I don't blame them. But on the other hand, some of us have worked it out. So, hopefully some others might do so in the future.
Yeah, and I know that David has done a lot of stuff with the Royal College of General Practitioners in the UK to train doctors up and give them a bit more insight in his sugar infographics that show how much glucose everyday foods break down into have been adopted by the National Institute for Clinical Excellence for use in the NHS, which is great. Yeah,
sure, and we haven't got there yet in this country, but we're working on it, and hopefully we like to think we're ahead of you POMs in most things, but I'm afraid on this instance you're way ahead of us. So we've got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, and it's I think the hope for me is that now that doctors are involved, there's no turning back, because if with all due respect to herbalists with a PhD off the internet, you're not necessarily going to listen to them in the same with the same respect that you would listen to a doctor. I think doctors are among the most trustworthy people in society. So when a growing number of them are saying, look, you can actually reverse some of the major chronic diseases here, prevent some of the major killers here, just by changing what you eat, then people are going to sit up and take notice, and they are. And I think that there's a wave growing that's going to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I mean, it is. It's just a matter of how quickly it happens, and I sort of think there's a tipping point. And once we get to that we'll make rapid progress, but we're not there yet. Certainly not in this country.
And it's interesting to see it happen sort of from the inside, as it were. And I think some people who are more cautionary than I am suggest that Atkins was a huge bestseller but didn't catch on around the world. And I think the difference is perhaps that his was a single brand with his name attached to it, as opposed to a decentralized notion. And also he didn't live in the age of the internet where this could be discussed endlessly so that the truth actually comes out, because for all the arguments, I think it improves the quality of debate and the facts coming out from fiction from both sides, because there's a lot of rubbish coming out from people on the sort of low carb side as well. And I think that getting all that getting aired constantly online is a really good thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think Atkins did have it pretty much right, but and he was perceived, I think, as trying to make money out of it, and I think that's always shooting yourself in the foot, really. I'm very careful not to, all the profits from my book go to our charity, Sugar by Half, and all my appearances and my, speaking engagements. I don't take any money. I just ask for donations. So I think, it's really important to maintain your credibility. I don't lend my name to any supplements or, anything like that. So I think that's really important, and I know David is the same, David Unwin. So, it's important for people to realize that you're doing this because you care about people's health, not because you're trying to make a buck out of it.
Yeah, well said. So I'm excited to talk to you about Liverpool, because my girlfriend's from Liverpool and her dad's got a season ticket in the Kop.
Oh, he's a lucky man. Yeah, right.
And I mean, they're one of the biggest football clubs in the world. And when I first kind of saw that you'd worked there and what you do now, I'd assumed that, and I'd seen in the past that Jurgen Klopp, there was that famous moment when he was offered a
Yeah.
giant Ginster's pasty, and he said,
Yep, that was great. Yeah.
what's that?" And they said, "Oh, it's for you." And he said, "I don't eat carbohydrates." And I just assumed that you had something to do with that, but
Yeah,
the
no, I
dates don't
didn't.
add up, do they?
No, they don't. No, 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 no. I've spoken to Jurgen about it, but no, it was totally independent of me. I was there well before Jurgen got there. I'd have loved to have worked with him. I mean, it would have been challenging, I'm sure, because he'd be very demanding. But they've got a very good nutrition team there. He's brought in some people who believe in that same philosophy, and it's one of the many areas in which they're doing things very well.
Yeah, it's really fascinating for me because I don't know if you've seen the film Moneyball about
Yep.
the American baseball team that was relatively small and hadn't had any silverware for a long time, and they used a kind of statistical model, whereas tradition, it was a sort of macho tradition in baseball,
Yep.
scouts to look at the shape of the guy's body and stuff instead of actually how often he scored. So Liverpool's doing a sort of a sort of dry statistical analysis on every area of their performance in order to squeeze out as much as they can. And I mean, look how far ahead they are in the table. It's amazing. So do you know much about their nutritional strategy just now?
Yeah, look, it's very focused on real food. They have well, they've always had a good canteen there, but it's really even better than it was in my day. As I said, they have a nutritionist there who's very passionate about real food. I wouldn't say they're low carb, but they're certainly lowish carb, and their carbs are quality carbs when they have them. But they're largely lots of healthy fats and proteins, and they encourage their players to eat at the club, breakfast and lunch at least, and have just high quality, good food available. And they have chefs who do a great job. And I think the players are really enjoying the food that's there. And as I said, it's very healthy. And I've also, to be fair, there are other clubs that are now embracing that. I've spent a little bit of time as a visitor at Arsenal the last couple of years, and certainly their canteen was similarly very high quality food and of a similar nature. So, I think there's been a real, and probably Liverpool did lead the way. There's been a real sort of change in the last decade or so in just the whole professionalism of the Premier League or English football. I think, to be fair, it was probably a little way behind some of the other codes, certainly even Australian rules football and some of the American sports and so on, from a general sort of sports science aspect. But I think they've caught up. They've caught up pretty quickly now, largely by importing some quality people from overseas that have helped develop the profession in the UK, and now there are lots of excellent UK practitioners working as doctors, physiotherapists, sports scientists, nutritionists in the Premier League. So I think that's an area that I think people really realise that it's a little bit like the David Brailsford sort of one percenters and things. The small things actually make a difference, and that if you do a whole bunch of small things right, then you're going to get a good result. And nutrition is obviously one of those areas where you can make a significant improvement. And Liverpool have been at the forefront of that.
Mm-hmm. And we see low carb or even carnivore now in the case of All Black, Owen Franks. Low carb coming into most sports somewhere. So cycling, rugby, football, there's signs of it. Do you think low carb can be better for sports people, or do you think there's a big individual variation? And if so, how should ordinary people decide how to eat?
Yeah, well, there's a few questions in that. Firstly, I mean, nobody needs as many carbs as the average person has. I mean, 200-300 grams of carbs a day is way more than we need, especially when they're not usually high quality carbs. As far as carnivore and ketogenic type diets go, I think some people do very well on them. As you said, I think there's a lot of individual variation. I think you've got to find the diet that is right for you. I think, for instance, I would encourage people who've had autoimmune disease or a lot of allergies or so on to maybe try a carnivore type elimination type diet initially and see what happens. I would encourage people with type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, etc., to go to the sort of ketogenic end of the carb spectrum, if you like. I think for the average person, especially a young, healthy, insulin-sensitive person, I mean, they don't need to be obsessed about the number of carbs, but they certainly don't need 200 or 300 grams of carbs. I think everyone can do very well on 100, 120 grams of carbs a day, which is still plenty of carbs. So it really depends on the individual, and basically depends on your level of insulin resistance. If you're severely insulin resistant, you're morbidly obese, you're type 2 diabetic or whatever, you need to really restrict your carbs, and at least in the short to medium term until you get your metabolic health under control, and then you can slowly back off a little bit. Pretty much as I did. I was probably ketogenic there for that 3 months, got my weight and metabolic health under control, and then sort of backed off, and now I'm probably sort of 60 or 70 grams of carbs a day or something like that, So, and that's right for me. It keeps my weight steady and keeps my metabolic health steady. But that's not necessarily right for you or for anyone else. It's just a lot of variation. Similarly with athletes, I have athletes who are totally low carb, who do very well at high intensity sports. But the majority of people in high intensity sports probably do need some carbs and a moderate amount of carbs. I think where the low carb ketogenic type diet can be very valuable is in endurance, ultra endurance sport, where the intensity is not too high, so fats are sufficient to fuel. There's a lot of advantages to that in ultra endurance sport. You can burn your own fat. You don't need to be constantly topping up with drinks and gels and so on the way you do if you're fueling yourself totally with carbohydrates, because we know that carbohydrate stores run out after a couple of hours. You famously hit the wall, and then there's advantages to having a higher proportion of fats and proteins in your diet as an athlete. But there are certainly people who find that yes, they're by and large they're pretty good on low carb, high fat, but when they need that surge of energy, if they're a cyclist to sprint or climb or whatever, they probably do need some carbs to top up. So it's a little bit of sort of a hit and miss, trial and error, find out what's right for you. What's quite popular now is the sort of the train low, compete high sort of philosophy, where, if you're in a weekly sport like a football team with a match every Saturday, you might be pretty low carb during the week, so you get your fat oxidation sort of happening, you become fat burner. And then on match day or the night before match day, you have some top-up carbs to give you some, sort of running off both fuel systems, if you like, and then back afterwards to the low carb. So the advantage of low carb and fueling yourself largely with fats is that, as I said, you don't need to constantly replenish. You've got a steady sort of source of fuel. You tend to recover better. You'll get less inflammation. So carbohydrates, especially processed carbs and sugars, are very inflammatory in nature. So and inflammation, we know, is the base of a lot of injury. So a lot of soreness after exercise. So I find that the low carb athletes recover a lot better, and arguably maybe have less injury, less inflammation, and so on. Although there's not really strong scientific evidence for or against that at this stage, but that's my experience and my own, both my personal and experience with others, that if you're reducing inflammation, then you're significantly helping your body recover and help manage injuries. So there's a few advantages to being a low carb athlete, but ultimately it's about performance, and as I said, individual variation. Some people certainly do need carbs, but no one needs a whole heap of them. So I think the days of 100%, fueling by carbs are just not necessary anymore. And I also worry about the long-term consequences of 10, 15, 20 years of massive amounts of high carbohydrates, a lot of it sort of sugars and sports drinks and so on. What's that going to do to people in the long term? They're going to become insulin resistant. They're more likely to have metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and so on. So all its complications. So that's a concern to me as well. So for all those reasons, I try and basically find the minimum amount of carbs that people can require for top performance, and go with that.
That makes sense. It echoes what I've heard David Pocock does in training low and playing high. So he'll have a
Yeah, I
couple
think
100 grams
Chris.
of.
I think Chris Froome's another one who does uses
Yep.
that philosophy. When he's having a nice easy ride, only 4 or 5 hours, he goes low carb. But on those big days, big training days or competition days, he realizes he needs to top up on some carbs. So, I get annoyed by these people who say, "Oh, you're 100% low carb or 100% high carb." I mean, the truth is very variable, and as usual, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I suppose we've evolved over millions of years this metabolic flexibility, so we're able to share information about how to maximize our fat burning equipment and use our glucose burning equipment in tandem in the best possible way.
Yeah, and I think a couple of other interesting things I've noticed is that there are a lot of athletes who train incredibly hard who are still a little bit overweight. It's quite remarkable. You see people running a marathon, and a significant number are carrying 2, 3, 4 kilograms more than they should be. And I think that's largely carb related. And when you get them onto a low carb diet, they'll tend to lose that 3 or 4 kilograms. They don't lose any muscle mass, so their power to weight ratio improves, and they're a lot better off. So that's really really quite helpful, I believe, for athletes to get their ideal weight, and you can certainly lose weight by burning fat. So that I think that can be quite helpful. And as I said, I think just for general health, it's really really very useful. The other thing that is also, just to be, in case your listeners get the wrong idea, don't the people who are changing from burning largely carbohydrate to burning fat, you've got to give it a bit of time. So the week before you run the London Marathon is not the time to swap onto a low carb diet. You probably need 3 months to really properly adapt. You start using fat as a fuel after a couple of weeks, but to fully adapt, I believe you need 3 months. So you often feel like crap for a couple of weeks. That's probably because you're low in salt, because all of a sudden you've gone from a high salt diet and lots of processed food to almost zero salt on a low carb diet. So you probably have to supplement with salt in the first couple of weeks to get over that sort of keto flu that they talk about. But then after a couple of weeks, you start to feel really good. And I remember about 6 weeks into my change of diet, I just felt like I could run forever. I'd never felt like that before. I was never much of a runner, and it was an amazing feeling. And just really had a lot of energy. So there's a lot of advantages.
Yeah, that echoes my friend who, we've got a cookbook coming out in June, John Meekin, very talented chef, and he was listening to me spouting off about all this and got the logic behind burning fat for fuel. So he switched over, and he found that his legs were tired when he was going upstairs or cycling, probably for about 10 weeks or a few months, and then the real mental clarity and physical sort of smooth performance came in, and he saw that you have to just get to that other side, especially if maybe like he is, mid-30s, kind of eating carbs your whole life, and it takes a while to get that equipment up to speed.
Yep, for sure. So, yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, look, we still don't know, the ideal athletic diet, and as I said, I don't think there is one. It's horses for courses, and you find out what's right for you. And there'll be world records set on high carb and a world record set on low carb, and it's whatever suits the individual and is right for them. So I don't think it does annoy me when people are so dogmatic that they think the whole world should be on a ketogenic diet or the whole world should be having massive amounts of carbs. And there's a lot of variation. There's a right amount of carbs for everyone. You just got to find it.
What was your time with the Australian cricket team like?
Well, cricket's an interesting sport. You spend an awful lot of time on the road. We had Ashes tours that went for 3-4 months. You spend more time with the team and the staff than you do with your family. it's a fascinating time. I'm a cricket fan. I've always played a bit of cricket. I've loved cricket all my life. So it was a great joy for me to be involved. I always thought that sort of cricket was my sport growing up, and just the way my career had worked out, I hadn't sort of got involved with cricket. I'd, always been in other sports, and I thought, oh, well, that's the way it works, and then obviously quite late in my career, I got a call to do one tour, and then it seemed to go well, and they offered me the job full time and so on. So it was actually the first time that Australia had a full time doctor, because you are on the road, for the whole time, and it's something you can't really do with a young family. I mean, there were years when I'll be 8 or 9 months on the road, so it's tough if you've got a young family. So it's a job for someone very young or very old. Unfortunately, I was the latter, but anyway. No, look, it was a fascinating time. Sport is a roller coaster ride, and I came into the Australian cricket team at just at the end of, after the great Australian era, where basically for 15 years we didn't lose a test match, that incredible sort of team, that will never be repeated. I think probably the greatest team of all time over that period. And so I was there at a time, which is quite challenging. So a whole generation of Australians had grown up never seeing their team lose a test match virtually, and all of a sudden, we went back to losing and winning the way we always had in the past, and it was a bit of a shock to the system for Australia. So it's some tough times there initially. We the first few tours I had, we really struggled, but slowly we developed into a better team, and we had some fantastic series. We had a series in Australia where Mitchell Johnson ripped through you guys, and we won 5-0, and that was pretty pleasant. And I don't want to labour the point, of course, but and then the World Cup, in 2015, where it was a home World Cup, and we managed to win that. That was, the final was played in my hometown. 90,000 people there, all my family and friends, and it was just a wonderful experience. But you have your ups and downs. We had a lot of disappointing times, and a very tragic time, of course, with the death of Philip Hughes, which was certainly the worst week of my life, and something that hugely affected not just the Australian team, but the whole Australian public. Were deeply affected by that. The fact that someone died playing cricket. You're just not supposed to die playing cricket. Cricket's a sport. It's our national sport. Everyone grows up playing cricket. And it was such a shock that someone as much loved as Philip was, should die playing a game of cricket. And that was a very challenging time for myself and for the whole cricket community. But as a doctor, you always sort of tend to be thrust into the middle of it all, and so on. So it was a tough time. But look, that's sport, and that's life, I suppose. But sport in particular is a roller coaster. One minute you're on top of the world, and the next minute you're disappointed, and so on. So you can't get too obsessed with the highs and too upset with the lows. But I loved it. I really enjoyed the cricket, and then the dressing room banter, and I dreamt as a kid of walking through the long room on my way out to bat at Lord's. Well, I walked through the long room. I didn't have a bat in my hand, but at least I got somewhere near it. So yeah, I had a great time. Really enjoyed it. Good bunch of guys, and they worked hard. And there was this perception that cricketers are not real athletes, because they're not as fit and so on. But that's changed in this generation. They work hard, they train hard, they're very dedicated, and but we have lots of laughs and lots of dressing room banter, and it was all good fun. But I really enjoyed it. It's great.
That's great. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that actually, because I met my dad. Cricket's not that popular in Scotland, but my dad is really into it, and he told me about when he was a boy. One of his favourite cricketers was interviewed and asked how he started training for the season beginning, and the guy said that he switched to filtered cigarettes.
Yeah, well, that's a generation ago, and it was very different then, very different, and it's changed a lot, and they've become real athletes now. If they're not playing cricket, they're in the gym, or they're running, or they're and they're paying attention to their nutrition and so on. So they were and they wanted to embrace those areas and get better and so on. I think they realised that they'd been a fair way behind other sports in that area, so they were very eager to embrace those aspects, which made it very rewarding.
I bet, yeah. Sometimes I think there's a disconnect between how sports teams feel themselves and how sports fans tend to feel themselves. Do you think
True.
that advertising and sponsorship from alcohol and food companies has anything to do with this? And what do you think could be done?
Well, I'm sure it does, and I'm a great advocate of healthy sponsorships. I don't think that sport should accept sponsorships from alcohol companies, from gambling companies, from junk food companies. And that's one of our campaign issues here in Australia that we're trying to tackle. I can see it from the sports point of view. Sports are, a lot of it's about money. They're all competing with each other and other potential sources of sponsorship. So it's tough, because for a long time the major sponsors were initially tobacco companies. Back in the days of Benson and Hedges Cup and so on. And then when that got banned, it's tended to be more alcohol and gambling and so on. So I get it. I get the difficulty of it all, but I think over time we've got to. I think sport has a responsibility to society to make the world a better place. And it's not just about money, and I think it's a great opportunity to get healthy messages out there. And I'm just hoping that sport will do that more and more. We have individuals who do that. You mentioned David Pocock before, and people like that. But as a whole, I think sport needs to take some responsibility and get healthier.
It'd be lovely to see. I kind of see a parallel with how hospitals sometimes conduct themselves. I know that
Yep.
for like in the shops in hospitals, you very often see a lot of junk food, and I've spoken to buyers for NHS trusts in the UK, and they say they try initiatives where they maybe have they allocate less shelf space for chocolate and more for fruit, but in the end they just end up throwing away more fruit and turning over the chocolate faster. So it'd be great to bring in healthy sponsorship to sport, but these things that are currently sponsors, they are popular because they're they engage the dopamine circuits, and they're kind of addictive, and they're sort of quote unquote fun. It depends how you define it, but what do you do?
Yeah, it's very challenging. It's similar to the tobacco campaign, and it probably took us 30 or 40 years to win that battle, and it's probably going to take us just as long to win the healthy food battle. Unfortunately, people are finding out the hard way, because we just get fatter and sicker all the time, and this can't keep going. We can't keep living the way we are, because we're all going to finish up with chronic disease. It's overwhelming the health systems of all of our countries and so on. So it's just not sustainable. So ultimately, we have to change. We can't keep treating disease. We don't have the resources and the money to do that. The only way to tackle our whole health system really is to prevent these chronic diseases developing, rather than waiting till they do and then throwing expensive drugs and surgery at them. So that's the only long-term solution to our health problems, is lifestyle, improving nutrition, getting people exercising, reducing stress, stopping smoking, reducing alcohol, getting people out in the sun. These are the important things that they're the things that are going to make a difference in our world as far as the health goes, and not bigger and fancier and more expensive drugs, because we're just fighting a losing battle there.
Yeah, and you picked up there on a topic that I find fascinating, which is the sun. I don't know if you follow Malcolm Kendrick's blog.
I do, yes.
About heart disease. And
Malcolm,
he highlighted a brilliant study on Swedish women that said, it was quite a powerful one, because there was a lot of women involved, and obviously epidemiology and associational studies have their flaws, but it more or less showed that women who avoided sunshine completely and never smoked had the same mortality as women who smoked like a chimney but were sun worshippers. So you can read that in a couple of ways, that smoking is avoiding the sun is as dangerous as smoking, or going out in the sun is as protective as not smoking. What do you think about that? And,
Yeah.
in light of especially the Slip Slap Slop campaign in Australia, which doesn't actually seem to have done very much, and the risk of skin cancer.
Yeah, I think like so many things in our modern society, we latch onto something and then we go overboard on it, And in Australia, we certainly have high rates of skin cancer, especially SCCs and BCCs, and a reasonably high rate of melanoma as well. And as a result of that, there was this massive campaign to keep people out of the sun. And kids these days are brainwashed into they're not going anywhere near the sun. They wear long sleeve tops. They wear caps that have things that come over their shoulders. I mean, that no one's going anywhere near the sun. And now we're having people who are vitamin D deficient in Australia. One of the sunniest countries in the world. It's just crazy. So. I just think people have gone overboard, and people don't realise the importance of being out in the sun. Sure, you want to avoid getting burnt. I mean, the big issue is getting burnt. You've got to absolutely avoid getting sunburned, because that's the thing that really causes problems. But time out in sort of moderate sunshine is really valuable. I always say there's a good reason why spring comes before summer. And it enables, people who didn't wear clothes, who spent their whole time outside, to gradually adapt to increasing warmth, and their skin adapts over time, and their body adapts. And I think we've gone too far the other way, and keeping our children in particular, just out of the sun. I know you don't have much choice in your country, but in our country we do have a bit of choice. And I think it's important.
Billy Connolly said there's two seasons in Scotland: winter and June.
Yeah, that's right. So, I think it's really important to get out in the sun. I try and get out in the sun every day, just for, not in the, the heat of the sun in summer or anything like that, but just to get some warm sunshine. And one of the interesting things I found, and there's a little bit of science behind this, is that when you are on a ketogenic type diet, you don't seem to get sunburned. It's quite interesting. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence. We think it's probably to do with vegetable oils, but there's some really fascinating research that a little bit has been done, but more needs to be done to look at that link. But so I believe that some sunshine is important. The key is avoiding getting burnt, and that is the thing that really destroys your skin and leads to those skin cancers you mentioned.
Yeah, and it's really Tucker Goodrich that's brought all the stuff about vegetable oils and sunburn to my attention initially.
Yeah.
And a lot of research about the breakdown products of these oils in the skin, which leave the skin extremely prone to further damage and quick sunburn. And even people with red hair able to spend, hours out in the sun without burning. It's really interesting.
Yeah, fascinating. So watch this space. I think we're going to hear a lot more about that. And it may not be vitamin D that's the issue. It may be nitric oxide that is the issue, and the vitamin D is a surrogate marker for that. It's actually the nitric oxide that is produced in the sun and lowers blood pressure and has a whole lot of beneficial effects on your health. That is actually what's the health benefit, because when you take vitamin D tablets, it doesn't have the same effect as getting your vitamin D from the sun. So that's an interesting theory, one that my colleague Paul Mason in Sydney is suggesting. So it's a fascinating area of research.
Yeah, I love Paul Mason's work, and I have done a fair bit of research around the literature on vitamin D3 supplementation versus sun exposure, and I caused a bit of controversy amongst my friends and family by using sunbeds occasionally. And the reason is this nitric oxide, stimulation really comes from UV contact with the skin. But of course, the problem with beds is that they might have about the same UVB production as like the midday sun in Greece or something, but the UVA production can be hundreds of times higher. So it's a calculated risk as far as I'm concerned, and I try to avoid any burning whatsoever. But it's just tough when you live in a place where there's very little sunshine.
Yeah, exactly. No, I sympathise.
And one day I would like to maybe create a sunbed which is really just like the sun, and you can under maybe doctor's supervision have prescribed sunshine. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, it'll happen for sure.
So can you tell us a bit more about Sugar by Half, because you mentioned it briefly, but obviously that's what you're spending a lot of time on.
Yeah, look, it's a not-for-profit charity that we set up about 3 or 4 years ago, with the aim of reducing the amount of added sugar by half. We've been working pretty hard. We've got a whole bunch of programs. We've got an education program that we've rolled out into schools. We've got a bunch of lessons that are available for teachers to teach. We've got a community sporting program trying to improve sporting club canteens and halftime snacks and rewards and so on. We've got a corporate program that we're rolling out that companies who want to do things in the wellness space can look at a sort of 6-week program called Hit Sugar for 6, and a bit of a cricket theme to it. And so we've got a national campaign ready to go. We just need some funding for that. And we're talking to a number. We're looking at a few other things as well. So we're pretty active. Obviously limited, like by most people, by funds and so on. But we're out there trying to raise money from philanthropy and have a crack. Because I think if let's say in our wildest dreams we were successful and you reduced the amount of added sugar by half. I mean, I don't think there is a single other initiative that would have as dramatic effect on people's health as that. You can, given that smoking is they've already done that, really. They've already halved smoking. But if we could halve the amount of added sugar and that would have a massive impact on the health of people in Australia and the UK and so on. So, while sugar's not the only thing, it's absolutely, but, it's a good start. And I think if you can reduce sugar, especially sugary drinks, they're that. But also the hidden sugar that's in so many of our processed foods, sort of 80% of processed foods have added sugar, most people don't even realise it, that their tomato sauce or their fruit yogurt or their muesli bar is just full of sugar. And, we've got to realise that and reduce it. But we're having fun and we're working hard and trying to have an impact on the Australian population.
Brilliant. I'm currently developing a sugar-free ice cream. And
great!
Working with a manufacturer, and I've got a working recipe now, and we're looking at getting it out this summer in the UK. I think it's caused a wee bit of kind of debate, because on the one hand, some people think desserts made with sweeteners can be a kind of trigger for people binging. But then on the other hand, for me, when I first started low carb, as a bit of a sugar addict, having homemade sugar-free ice cream with sweeteners was like a godsend, because it was a bridge away from all that stuff. So I think it can be, a tool that's useful for folk.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good luck with it. Yeah, I look forward to. I'll be in Scotland later in the year. I look forward to tasting it. So
fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and chatting.
I've enjoyed it. It's been great.
And maybe you could tell people where they can find you online, where you want them to find you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, sugarbyhalf.com is our sort of a website for the Sugar by Half program. I have my own website, peterbruckner.com, but that's mainly to do with my sports medicine sort of stuff. So most of my nutrition stuff is on fatlotofgood.com.au, which is the name of my book, fatlotofgood.com.au. And that's got a whole bunch of nutrition stuff on it as well. So, and you can follow me on Twitter at Peter Brukner, PeterBrukner. I'm not really an Insta man, I'm not the right age group for that. But so mainly Twitter. I find Twitter interesting because you get a lot of good information off Twitter. A lot of people post interesting articles and things like that. So I use that as a real education tool. So I tweet occasionally. So there you go.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, no, I always find that there's a new social media platform to come along and make you feel old no matter what age you are. I mean, I remember when I was about 4 years old, and my little sister, who was 1 at the time, had her foot in her mouth, and I thought, I didn't know the words at the time, but I was thinking, because I couldn't do that anymore. I was thinking, man, I'm getting old.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Well,
I'm not on TikTok, but I don't know if you've even seen TikTok or Snapchat or any of the. I sound
yeah,
like such a
I've
curmudgeon.
seen. My kids are into that sort of stuff, but no, I keep it simple. Keep it simple. Too old for new tricks.
All right, nice one. Well, I'll put all the links for that in the show notes so people can
Great.
track you down.
Good. Now, I'm sorry if I've waffled on a bit, but I hope it doesn't bore people too much.
No, I'm sure it hasn't. It's all been great stuff. Thanks a lot, Peter.
Right, my pleasure. Been a pleasure. Thanks.